welcome to this Dreamweaver tutorial. My name is Daniel Walter Scott and I'm a trainer here at Bring Your Own Laptop. In this course we're going to be looking at creating our CSS sheet, which is short for a cascading style sheet, which will style our fonts. So the first thing we need to do is make sure you can see your CSS designer on the right hand side here. If you can't see it, it's under Window and just down here make sure the tick is on CSS designer. So the first thing we need to do is create our CSS sheet. Now hit this little plus button on the sources panel, okay, and we're going to create a new CSS file. Now what will happen is it's going to create a file for us. So a CSS file is an extra file that's going to go into our website and we're going to give it a name. I'm going to call ours main. It's really common to call it main, but you can call it anything you like. Okay, there's no specific naming conventions for CSS. Just try and avoid things like spaces and don't use any of the characters like a $ or an asterisk or an @ symbol. Any of those sorts of ones can cause you problems. Leave it as a link and let's click OK. Alright, so what's happened now is it's created a CSS sheet. It's put it up here in our related documents bar. It says this is our HTML page, but this is a separate sheet that is related to this document to help it work. And I'll show you on the desktop as well. So in our website, we've got this new sheet called CSS. Okay, so main.css, a separate sheet, but together it's going to style our website. So first thing we've done is created our CSS sheet. It's over here, main.css. Now we're gonna skip media, okay, because that's getting a little bit more complicated. We'll look at that in a later tutorial. That's for the media queries when we're looking at mobile and tablet versus desktop. For the moment, we're going to move to selectors. So to help Dreamweaver along, what you can do is you can highlight the selector you want to play around with. So we're going to play around with this thing called a tag. So remember our H1 tag? So we're going to play around with this. So the overall name for a tag is called a selector. So this one here, we're going to pick our main.css and we're going to create a selector. Now it tries to do its best at defaulting what you are trying to know what your intention was. Now it's created this one for body.h1. I just want to style the h1 by itself. I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard. Great. So in my main.css, I'm styling the selector called h1. And down the bottom here, these are all the properties that I can play around with in CSS. Now it starts off with layout. We want to jump to the one that says type, okay, or text. Click on the T and it will jump down the list. It's a big long list. It'll jump down to where it says type. So we can start playing around with a few parts. We can start playing around with color. So let's have a look at the color. You can slide this hue slider up and down to pick your colors. Now you'll notice it still stays black at the top here. It's because this circle needs to be moved out to the different levels of the color you would like. So move it out to the middle and you'll see now I've got a nicer blue. And now I can play with the hue slider and adjust the color. So I'm going to pick a blue, rough kind of blue there. You can make it darker or lighter. Okay, and you can play around with the opacity of the color as well. I'm going to leave mine at this blue, and when I'm finished, I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard, and it's put the color into my CSS, and you'll notice over here, my H1 is now this blue color. All right, so let's have a look at styling some of the other parts. So I'm going to click inside my H1, and you can see down here, it's defaulted to H1, and I got my color there. Now, font family, let's drop that down. So I get to pick a font. Now what happens with fonts on a website is that you don't embed the font like you do in a JPEG or a PDF. What happens is you add the code to the website and your website asks your user, do they have that font on their computer? That's why there's this big long list with all these commas. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick Gill Sans. And what we're asking the user's computer is, when it loads the website, is say, hey, do you have Gill Sans on your machine? If it does, it will load it. If it doesn't, it will look for this other font, the next one, Gill Sans MT. If it doesn't have that, it will look at Myriad, then Deja Vu, then Helvetica, then Arial, and then the sans serif one. So it's bound to have one of these fonts. So when you are picking fonts, know that you've suggested Gill Sans, but it might end up being Myriad Pro. Later on in the course, we're going to look at something called the @FontFace value, and that will help us pick more specific fonts and help get a bit more consistency. But at this stage, we're going to suggest fonts. So pick Gill Sans, and you'll notice over here, it's picked a nice big Gill Sans. So the default for an H1 was big, black, Times New Roman, and it's got this big space afterwards. So we've gone through and changed it to blue, Gill Sans, but we've left the bold on there. So if you want to remove things like the bold, down here in my properties, down the bottom right, font style is to do with italics or not. I'm going to leave that normal. Font variant, you can change it to small caps. Font weight, this is the one I want to play around with my bold. So you've got normal or bold. There are some other options in here, but unless you are really understand how the @font face value works at the moment, leave these ones and you can only play with normal and bold. We'll look at these at a later course. So normal and bold, I'm going to change it down to normal because I want to remove the bold. By default it was bold, so I've moved it to normal. Alright, there's a few other things you can play around with, and let's look at font size. So to start with, we're going to look at pixels or points. It's up to you which you prefer to use. We're going to use points, and we're going to pick something big, something maybe 20, but not too big. So watch this. When I hit 20 and hit enter, there he is over here. My H1 is a more useful size. Obviously you can go bigger and smaller as you need, and we're going to use points for the moment. Later on we're going to be using something called ems, but for the moment use points or pixels, it doesn't really matter. So let's leave it there, and after the next tutorial we'll look at styling some of the other tags. So we'll style the P tag and the H2, and we'll style these link tags as well. Great, so that's the end of this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one.